Yeah, okay. Well, put your hands together now for Ben for the second half. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Forgot. Ben will be finishing at 10, finishing his talk at 10, after which there'll be questions and answers. Okay? Just let you know. Right.
Thanks, Emlyn. Thanks, Steve. Right, yeah, so we shall continue. But by the way, it's Big Brother's on in the bar. Yeah, I said it's on TV, isn't it? So you should be doubly congratulated, and I feel very pleased with myself because right now I'm competing with Big Brother on TV, and you guys have come out here to watch me. That's quite something, isn't it? Normally you can't get any, when Big Brother's on TV, everything else stops, doesn't it? So no. Oh, good. There's a couple of people with some sense. Yeah, good. No, that's Six Nations. That's the only exception. Well, I hope you had a nice break, and we've been learning about the history of exopolitics, and I've been talking about, of course, the Gary Initiative and everything related to the United Nations. But the story does not end there. After the Gary Initiative was very unceremoniously and brutally scuppered, thanks to earthly problems. Well, that wasn't the end of it. A good idea never goes away, especially an idea whose time has come. And well, this is where things carry on, and this is the man who carries them on. I think this is Timothy Good. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of this guy. You may probably read some of his books. Actually, he's one of the world's most prolific UFO authors, and he's been writing books. Well, he's written about 30 now. It's amazing what he's done. Some of them are out of print. He's just brought out a new one. Well, a couple of years ago, he brought out a new one. Now, this book here, Above Top Secret, he was published in 1987. It's not the first book he wrote, but I think it seems to have been the most definitive. I think this book, for whatever reason, broke through into the mainstream in a way that his previous books didn't, nor have his subsequent books, I should add. I don't know why that is exactly, because Tim's books, I mean, they're excellent and they're packed full of essential information, but they're all pretty much the same format. They tend to be a list of cases almost in chapter by chapter form without any particular narrative arc through the entire book. So this was no exception, but it was a book that I read, and really I think it piqued my interest, and a lot of people I know have said, well, how did you get interested in UFOs? Oh, I read Above Top Secret. It's fantastic. And this book is very, very interesting in a number of ways, and unique in a number of ways. For instance, the Majestic 12 documents were first published in this book. Now, the Majestic 12 documents are very controversial. I know that ufologists have been debating whether they're real or not, and there's some reason. I mean, I myself have kind of come full circle a little bit, because there was some people who looked at them and said that there's a lot of it looks, some of the documents are distinctly fake and they're not quite right, and there were several different reasons for that. However, the recent research by Bill Wood, I think, is much more favourable. For example, he's worked out that the documents were actually produced on a typewriter of a particular model. It's a Remington 420 or something like that, which was only in common use in the 1940s, and today there's only about 4 of them left, and they're all in museums. So if it's a modern hoax, someone must have raided a museum and got hold of a Remington 420 typewriter. Things like that. I think it's very, very interesting. But the Majestic 12 documents appeared on film and were given to a guy called Jamie Chandray. Timothy Good got in touch with him and he agreed to publish them in this book. He talks about a secret cabal of government officials, high government officials, who have been designated to handle the covert UFO operations, which involves things such as crash retrievals, the Roswell incident, things like that. Which the Majestic 12 documents, if they are genuine, are explosive, because they are proof of the government's involvement in secret UFO operations, the knowledge that these things exist, and that there is an attempt to keep these things from the public. Very, very interesting indeed. This book also contains an interview with a guy called Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Hill Norton, who you may well have heard of before. Sadly, he's passed away now, but he was a major, he was a ufologist and very keen campaigner. He was an exopolitical campaigner of a type similar to Sir Eric Gairy. He wanted to raise the issue of UFOs in the political sphere. Now, Lord Hill Norton, I mean, is the kind of guy. Again, we got to ask. The skeptics say people are all crazy. People who believe in UFOs are crazy, and they portray us in a certain way as being loonies, fringe, freaky, flaky people, people who sit on hillsides and things like that. Lord Hill Norton had commanded a battleship and an entire fleet during the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II. He was on the organising committee for NATO. He was chief of the defence staff, which meant he was basically in charge of Britain's armed forces. And this included the nuclear weapons that Britain had. So he's not the kind of person you would put in that kind of position if he was in any way mentally unstable. And if for one moment he was seen going off and standing on some hillside like Wyn Keach, pointing at the sky and things like that, and with cameras and telescopes looking for UFOs, he would be removed from his responsibility for those things without a doubt. No, he's very, very. Lord Hill Norton was a very stable, very, very sane man indeed, very rational, and he tried to bring up the subject of UFOs in the House of Lords, things like that, in the same way that Sir Eric did in the United Nations. So that is a book I think is a classic within UFO literature, I believe. Next slide, please. And then in the early 1990s, this man appeared, this fine figure you see before you, Dr. Stephen Greer. Now, Dr. Stephen Greer is he's a doctor, and he's head of an emergency department at a hospital in North Carolina. Yes, I'm just a country doctor from North Carolina, he says. Very, very modest man indeed. Thoroughly modest. But he set up CSETI, which is the Centre for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Not to be confused with SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where basically the astronomers point telescopes at the sky to try to pick up signals from other planets, which is a bit redundant when you consider the other evidence we're discussing tonight. So CSETI set up. He also set up several other organisations, including the Disclosure Project, to try and basically bring the subject of UFOs into the public domain and to raise its awareness on a political and personal and social level. He wrote a book called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which talked about his own personal encounters with extraterrestrials, which is interesting to read. Very interesting to read indeed. Now, all this, his work came to a head in 2001. Next slide, please. And on May the 9th, 2001, he went to the National Press Club and set up the Disclosure Project Press Conference, which was a 4-hour session. A DVD was produced of it with highlights, just an hour and a half of highlights. But this was streamed live on the internet. Now, in 2001, that's actually quite a rare thing. The internet's actually changed quite considerably and expanded and modernised, and is far, far more developed now than it was just those few years ago. And live streaming on the internet was a very, very rare thing. It was very difficult, and this particular live stream was the most popular ever in history at that time, on the history of the internet. Over 20,000 people logged in to watch this live at the National Press Club. Dr. Greer assembled. What he'd been doing is, over the last few years, he'd been collecting interviews with various witnesses involved from the military, from the intelligence organisations, from pilots, air traffic control, the government, and recording them onto tape, people who decided to speak out, people in the space program, astronauts as well, from all over the world, specifically in the United States, and basically published these as a video. He made a DVD of this with the Disclosure Witness DVDs and videos, and they're online as well. You can see them on YouTube now. You can see this on YouTube as well. But next slide, please, Mike. So there's Dr. Greer opening the conference. Well, it was actually opened at the National Press Club by a famous actor. I can't remember who it was. And he introduced Greer, and then Greer came up and introduced the various witnesses who came forward to speak. And it was a remarkable, absolutely remarkable collection of testimonies. Very, very credible indeed. And I'll go through some of, I think, the most important ones now. So next one, please, Mike. This is John Callahan. Now, he was head of the Federal Aviation Administration's Accident Investigation Department. It's a very, very high-level man in the world of air traffic control, air safety, and aviation and airway administration. He has to deal with UFOs regularly. Reports from pilots of all kinds, reports from passengers, reports from radar operators. And one of the most interesting things he had to deal with is in 1986 when two pilots from a Japanese cargo aircraft flying close to Alaska were intercepted by a flat, a sort of a bulky discus-shaped object, which was up to 10 times the size of their aircraft. And they were flying a Boeing 747. So we're talking about something monstrous, larger than an oil tanker, flying in the air next to them. And these two pilots, both the pilots said they saw it. Very, very credible case indeed. It was reported. There's radar evidence. There is testimony, and there's recordings of the air traffic control conversation. There's a transcript of the conversation. Very, very important thing that he discovered. And this guy had to deal with it. He's there on stage, and. He's not scared to speak out and face ridicule if necessary. Next one, please, Mike.
That was Captain Terrahuchi, wasn't it?
Terrahuchi, I never remember that guy's name.
He was grounded for his troubles for 2 years to a desk job.
Was he? Oh right, Steve. I don't know if you heard Steve. He said that the pilot of the aircraft, one of the pilots, was actually grounded as a result of his encounter. Which again, you've got to say, well, okay, skeptics. Where's the career move? Is this a wise career move? Why would people make this stuff up? When they don't actually get a lot from it. In fact, they often pay. Speaking out about this subject often comes with a terrible cost. This guy here is Charles Brown, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Brown, retired. He's a World War II veteran, a pilot, and he was involved with Project Grudge, Project Sign, and Project Blue Book, which was the US government's last official investigation into UFOs. And he has signed an affidavit, and he is. Now this means that basically he's saying what he says is true, and if he's lying, he will get into trouble as a result of this affidavit. But he has said that he believes that the phenomenon is very, very real indeed. He's investigated it, and he says it's very, very real indeed, and he's willing to testify under oath before the US Congress that what he's saying is true. So these are very, very these are not statements that can be ignored. Next slide, please. This is Captain Robert Salas. Now, again, skeptics, I brought this up when I discussed Lord Hill Norton. What do they say about us? What skeptics say about believers in UFOs is that we often exhibit a possible mental problems. Schizotypal disorders is one of the things they talk about. Small neuroses, minor neuroses and psychoses, and schizotypal disorders. We're freaky people, we wear tinfoil hats, we stand on hillsides with our hands in the air, things like that. This man, Captain Robert Salas, he had a job. His job meant that, by his very definition, meant that his mental health was more carefully screened than anyone else in the world. Because this guy's job was to have his finger on the nuclear button. Captain Robert Salas was he was the end of a chain of command in which he would actually activate America's nuclear deterrent. He sat in his bunker. It was called a capsule, this bunker, and he operated a certain number of missiles. If an order came through for him to launch the missiles, he would launch these missiles. If this guy got a screw loose, it would be the end of the world, totally. So I actually met Captain Salas a couple of years ago. He was at one of the UFO Truth magazine conferences, and he was talking about his job, and he said, "Oh, my job was very boring indeed." And he said that was good, because if it ever got interesting, that would be my last day on Earth, and it would be the last day on Earth for us all. It's the idea that this guy, the skeptics, I would say to the skeptics, really, please do think twice before making comments like this about people. All right, because it's not just an insult to Captain Salas, and it's an insult to our intelligence. It's embarrassing for them to say something so stupid, and it displays their ignorance so badly. It really does. Captain Salas in 1964, he was at work, as usual, in his bunker, 60 feet below the ground, and waiting for the order, if it came, which would come in a coded message, which he would then get out him and his fellow missile combat launcher would get out the triggers and they'd press the buttons and launch the missiles. If that coded order came through, they would do it, definitely. He was waiting for that, and he was there, and suddenly the security guard above ground, above the bunker where there's the entrance to the bunker, he phoned out to say, "Oh, Captain, there's some strange things going on up here. We see some strange red lights just outside the gate, just hovering there." And he said, "Okay, I'll just keep an eye on things, make sure everything's okay." And then suddenly, his the missiles on the display board they suddenly started switching off. And he pressed the button to try and get them started again. They wouldn't come on. They just broke down, just like that, all of them at once. Should be impossible. And it was a couple of weeks they had to get the engineers out to have a look at it. It was a couple of weeks before they could get them back working again, at the very same time. And this was in 1964. There's been other events since then, not just on the western side either, but in the Soviet missile launching facilities there were similar events. So it seems that the UFOs have an interest in our nuclear weapons. There's many other cases of UFOs involving nuclear weapons, like the Rendlesham Forest incident, for example. But they seem to have they seem not only to have an interest in it, but they often sometimes display their ability to control these weapons, or perhaps shut them down, which is actually quite good news when you think about it, isn't it? If that time ever came when the governments would actually try to launch these things. Next slide, please, Mike. This is what's his name? Oh, I can't remember. I'm having a Portering moment. This man, Carl Wolf. Sorry, Carl. This is Carl Wolf. Next slide, please. This is Donna Hare. These two people worked for NASA, and they were involved in processing photographs from the space program, and they would bring in photos that came from various space missions, the Apollo program, for example, various probes that were sent to the moon. This was before they started sending craft to Mars and other places like this. And these guys have revealed that NASA would actually doctor photographs before publishing them to the media. So if a photograph came down, they would actually look at they'd get someone to look it over, and they'd say, "Oh, you better just rub that bit out. You've got an airbrush or a little or maybe you can just cut it out, just crop that photo a bit to get rid of that thing there." And then that would then be presented to the media. And the things that were cropped out and were removed or airbrushed out were unidentified flying objects photographed in space, which is interesting because a lot of astronauts, from the Russians like Gennady Strikalov, Colonel Gordon Cooper, Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin, have all reported seeing strange things in space, and they've spoken openly about it. Aldrin and actually Cooper actually made reports to Mission Control, and these have actually been recorded. You can hear them; they're online. When they say, "Oh, there's a spacecraft," there's something. They would say, "Oh, there's a UFO out there." They just say, they use code like a bogey's 10 o'clock height, things like that. And there's other examples of astronauts speaking out about this. Another thing that the NASA were doing was pictures of the moon itself. Were being. These include pictures of the dark side of the moon. It's not dark. It's called that, but it's the side farthest away from the Earth, facing away from the Earth, where they can't be seen by astronomers from the ground. There are actually artificial structures there, and NASA were removing those before publishing this to the media. Structures are obviously buildings. These are obviously constructions built by, or as if they'd been built by humans, which they may have, I don't know. With other missions we don't know about, might have built them, or built by something else that's not human, or maybe a joint combined effort, you don't know. But either way, NASA was actually removing this evidence from the public record, from published media data that was given to the media. And these two people, Donna Hare and Carl Wolf, knew about it, and they both independently come forward and said so. And interestingly, in the last couple of years, a third person has come forward. I can't remember his name now, but he's come forward to say exactly the same thing. Next slide, please. This is Larry Warren. Now, this man, I think, is the most important witness to the Rendlesham Forest incident. And there's many very vociferous claims to the contrary, but I don't go along with them. Having looked at the evidence, I've read his book. He's written a book called Left at East Gate, and I've got to know him personally, actually, and spoken to him. The evidence is undeniable that he had a remarkable experience, and it has affected him and still affects him to this day. His mental and physical health has been harmed by what happened to him in December 1980, where an object came down to Earth near a US nuclear armed base, and this guy was one of the security police who was sent out to deal with it. That was really, again, we see this connection between nuclear weapons and UFOs. So that's an interesting. That comes up again and again and again. Next slide, please. This is George Filer. Now he was a pilot. He was a pilot of a jet aircraft in the US Air Force, and one of his jobs he actually fly out and intercept UFOs. And he was ordered occasionally to get very, very as close as he could to UFOs. At one point he was cruising at 30,000 feet, and he was told to immediately descend to 10,000 feet, which it's quite a dangerous thing to do in a high-speed aircraft. And he did it because he had to try and intercept this UFO. And he often did get quite close to them, but then they would zoom away very, very quickly, faster than any aircraft could go. So he's another guy who's willing to swear in front of Congress, and he's signed an affidavit. Next slide, please. Now this lady is one of the most interesting witnesses of all. This is Carol Rosin. Now she was a friend of Werner von Braun, who was the rocket scientist, a former Nazi rocket designer of missiles, the V1 and V2 missile, which was wielded against this country in World War II. After the war, he was appropriated by Operation Paperclip and worked on the space program and designed the Apollo rockets, which essentially are very, very similar in design to those missiles. Now, what he said was, I think I'm going to bring this up again because he said that the government, he told her that the government would manipulate information on UFOs. They wouldn't just try to suppress it. The time would come when they may try to reveal the truth about UFOs, but it wouldn't be a real revelation. So they would come and say, yes, UFOs are real. It would be a disclosure, but it would be a fake disclosure. And it would probably be, she believed that it would be something like, they're real, but they're bad, they're evil. And so we need to unite and fight against these aliens. And she said a government could be very, very desperate to the point where that would actually happen. They would actually play that card against us, a psychological warfare card against us, to try and, as a last resort, to try and introduce authoritarian government. Werner von Braun, interestingly, he predicted the end of the Cold War, pretty much when it actually happened, and also the rise of international terrorism as a replacement for that Cold War, as the major threat to civilization on Earth. So very, very interesting indeed. And this lady speaking out, it's very, very interesting things she has to say. It really is very much indeed. Next one, please, Mike. But just like with the Gary Initiative, real-world events dragged everyone back down to Earth, and the momentum that was generated was enormous. I mean, the momentum that was generated was crushed. The momentum on May the 9th, 20,000 people watched this. It was, the recordings of it were watched online. This is before YouTube, but it was watched on various video sharing sites again and again and again. The press were very interested in it. There was a lot of media attention. It got into the mainstream quite considerably. So it is similar to the Gary Initiative in that sense. A real momentum was building, and people were very, very optimistic. And on September the 11th, 2001, 9/11 happened, and it was all gone. It was complete in a single day. All that good work was undone. And Steve Bassett, I'm going to talk about later, Stephen Greer, they all say this. They all say it was an awful thing that happened, because who knows what would have happened with the disclosure process if 9/11 had not happened. That inevitably leads to the question: was 9/11 done specifically to prevent that disclosure project movement? Was it done to quash it, to distract people away from it? Now, as I said, I don't believe that was the case with the Gary Initiative. I'm not so confident now with with this particular event, this more recent example of the same thing. There may be many reasons why 9/11 was done. Probably more than one. Certainly more than one. This could be one of them. There's no doubt, though, that if you were the keeper of the secret of UFOs, and something like this happened, and you were watching the Disclosure Project press conference, and you thought, this is trouble, this is real trouble. Then 9/11 comes along, you'd be going, thank God for that. God, we were lucky there, weren't we? You can bet that they would take advantage of this situation, even if they hadn't created it or at least created it for that purpose, or they weren't part of the group that had created it for whatever purpose. So, yeah, it's very, very sad indeed. But again, from the ashes rose the phoenix. Next slide, please. Now, Dr. Stephen Greer has not gone away. He's still hard at work, and he's still doing his stuff, and he's planning more things. He's still speaking, he's still making movies, he's still doing various press conferences and interviews. And here he is doing in a debate, a very heated debate actually, with Kerry Cassidy of Project Camelot. Now you can watch this on YouTube. It's quite long. It's an hour and a half or so, where they're just basically at it, hammer and tongs. Bill Ryan, Kerry's colleague, is there. He's almost silent. It's just basically these two having a go at each other, and it does get quite vitriolic. Very, very fueled, and it's actually quite amusing to watch. I must say, I did enjoy it. But the fact of the matter is, though, it's what is actually at stake is very, very interesting indeed. And this is a very, very important question. The origins, what caused this row was that Dr. Stephen Greer when he talks about the extraterrestrials, he talks about them as benevolent. He believes that they are all benevolent beings. They are loving, spiritually advanced, and only want good for the world. All of them. And you think, wherever they come from out there, the only problems, the only evil comes from us down here on Earth, the humans. We're the only bad guys on the block. All the others are good. We're the only ones with a problem. And there's no danger at all from any extraterrestrial because they're all nice. Kerry Cassidy wrote an article on her blog basically saying that's not true. And she was quite vehement about that, and I actually agree with her. I think she went a bit over the top, but I actually agree with her on that, and I'll say a bit more about that in a little while. But anyway, this led to this very, very heated barrage of various insults and other veiled microaggressions towards each other. It's quite funny to watch. Next slide, please. And here we see Dr. Stephen Greer boasting again. I like your story, Steve. And Kerry Cassidy, I think she can see through it, can't she? She doesn't look very impressed there, does she? No, she's... Next slide, please. Dr. Stephen Greer has recently released this movie, Sirius. Now, this is actually worth watching, although there's not much original in there, I must say. There's lots of pictures of Greer himself wearing tight jeans, which I expected. In fact, I think over half the shots are that. But there's a couple of interesting things. For instance, he's doing some scientific analysis of a little body he calls Atta, this Atacama humanoid. How many of you are familiar with the Star Child skull? Do you know about that? Yeah, that's I think that's a more interesting case. It's a more advanced research project than this one. We're still waiting for to find out what this tiny little creature is that he's discovered. So it's worth watching Sirius, it is. So Greer is still at work and he's still doing his thing. He's as controversial as ever. I'm not sure I completely trust him, but still worth watching, looking at what he does. Next slide, please. And he's not alone out there. There are many, many others. Now this, when a few years after Greer actually started his work, this guy picked up his bat and he walked out to the crease, and he has been doing something very, very similar actually. He's a more, I must say and he's very, very confident about this. He's currently, he spends all his time in Washington DC. He's American himself, but of course he says this includes, he was also interested in other countries, including this one, about the possibility that other countries could become the disclosure country. It's really quite something. And he's not only interesting what he has to say, he's very, very persuasive, because I myself am very much in two minds about everything he says, and there's a lot of internal conflict in my own mind about what he says. But he's extremely persuasive. Very, very, he can really make you believe it. Next slide, please. Now, in 2013, Dr. Stephen Bassett organised the disclosure, the ET Disclosure Citizen Hearing Initiative. Now, this is the most remarkable thing to happen since the Disclosure Project press conference or the Gary Initiative. What happened was, in the very, very same room that the Disclosure Project press conference took place, the main ballroom at the National Press Club, Bassett got together a panel which consisted of former members of the US Congress, former members, and he paid them privately, and he just said to them, look, just come out of retirement and work privately for me, doing what you used to do when you were in Congress, carrying out a congressional investigation or congressional hearing. It's one of the things that Americans do in their legal system, is they have congressional hearings where they appoint members of the US Congress to a board to investigate something and to interview people and have hearings and things like that. That's what he wanted them to do. It was called the Citizen Hearing because it was organised privately. The money it cost over $1 million and the money came in privately from benefactors. And this was amazing. This was streamed online as well, and this went on for an entire week, and it was quite riveting actually. I mean, I'd get home from work and I'd be working in the morning. I used to work in the mornings in those days, and usually had afternoons off on that week. And it was very, very good because it would start about 2 p.m. because this was like Washington time. So I'd get home from work and I'd be glued to it all day. I rather missed it when it was finished. Actually, it was really, really quite remarkable. Next slide, please. That there is Dr. Stephen Greer and Stephen Bassett answering questions from the various Congress people, the ex-Congress people on the board. Next slide, please. That there is Gary Heseltine on the left, who I believe has spoken on this stage. Yeah, he's been here. He's the editor of UFO Truth magazine. To his right is Peter Robbins, who's the co-author of Larry Warren's Left at East Gate. I'm talking about the Rendlesham Forest incident. So that's them. Next slide, please. And behind all this row of activists, you have to have the theoreticians of the movement. And this man, I think, is the biggest of the theoreticians and is one of the most important. This is Richard Dolan. Now, he's written some amazing books on UFOs. He is, again, he's an academic. He's a very, very accomplished academic, trained at Oxford. He was actually shortlisted for a Rhodes Scholarship, and he came to Oxford and studied political science and history, specialising in Cold War diplomacy, and he studied at various different places. But while he was over here in Oxford, he actually had he comes from America. He studied at Oxford University. He picked up a copy of Above Top Secret, that book again by Timothy Good, and he read it, and he decided to bring in the UFO angle into his thesis that he was working on, his political historical thesis, and it changed his life because he suddenly realised that the whole UFO issue was taking over everything else. And he suddenly, it's almost like it was a key that unlocked a completely new door onto the whole subject of what he was already discussing. This is a man very, very familiar with conventional politics and history. And the UFO phenomenon actually made him more, it's all brought out so much more, and so much more, it gave him a clue, in other words, to solving puzzles that he otherwise wouldn't have been able to solve. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I think we have a saucer in the hangar. Now, a saucer in the hangar, this is a bit of a joke actually, because the term saucer in the hangar is actually coined by Nick Pope in his Sun column, and it refers to the crash retrieval situation. I do believe that this has happened. I do believe that the government knows far more than, not only the government treats UFOs as a joke, despite the UN draft resolution that Sir Eric Gary got from the UN. The government treats it as novelty. They have no official line on it at all. And since the UFO desk closed down in 2002, there's been no. Nick Pope himself has gone freelance. He doesn't work for that anymore. So there's no official government policy on UFOs. the media treat it as a complete and utter farce. I was talking in the break to people about UFOs on TV. Now, again, despite the UN draft resolution about unidentified flying objects and its political mandate to take them seriously, UFO portrayal in the media is appalling. It's got worse. I mean, you go back 20 years and there are a couple of half-decent documentaries on UFOs. A couple. There are none now at all, and the ones they have, the bad ones have got worse and worse and worse. They've plummeted to a nadir that I've never seen before. I've been asked to take part in a couple of UFO TV documentaries. I've refused, and when I see them, I'm very glad. And I've often said there's a limit to how bad a TV program can be by accident. So there is a suppression of this information. I believe the government know more than they're saying, through various different their own secret research projects into UFOs, also other phenomena such as crop circles. That's a whole subject in itself. But I think the Roswell incident was an artifact of an extraterrestrial civilization, a non-human intelligent civilization, came to grief on the Earth's surface in July of 1947 in New Mexico, USA. I believe that the government secretly salvaged that craft and have kept it secret from the public to this day, putting out lies, cover-ups, no comments, and disinformation to try and prevent the truth coming out about that event. And what surprises me, I think Roswell is actually a name. Of course, it's the name of the town in New Mexico near where this happened. But Roswell is not the only time this has happened. It's not even the first. There were some before Roswell. I was surprised to find this out when I started looking into it. There's been many others since. Now, there's a book called Magic Eyes Only. I can't remember the title of the book. Magic something. MAGIC, Majestic 12 kind of thing, which lists over 100 similar events to this, to the Roswell incident, including several in this country. There's at least 2 in this country. So it's a regular thing. The UFO crash retrieval is a regular thing, and it's going to continue to happen most likely. And it seems that there are government institutions which are specifically trained to deal with them, because when these things happen, wherever it is in the world, the same procedure is undergoing. Even one happened. There's a very interesting case actually happened in South Africa in 1989, and the very, very same thing happened at Roswell, as if the people in government already knew what to do, as if there's some kind of global policy in place for dealing with this eventuality. The book actually lists over 100 examples. If just a handful of those are real, just think what that means. Next slide, please. Now, what UFOs are? I mean, are they spaceships? Do they come from other planets? Do they fly here from Zeta Reticuli? We don't know. We know that they appear to be mechanical devices of some kind, and they're inside them you find biological type entities like this one. This is a model, but incidentally not a real thing. This is at the Roswell Museum in Roswell, New Mexico. Incidentally, the skeptics go absolutely ape about Roswell and its UFO museums, its UFO exhibitions, its UFO conferences and things like that. And they say it's absolutely shameful the way it's really tacky, and they make a lot of money off this little thing, don't they? This little this alien industry they have, don't they? I always say to the skeptics, if you don't like that, if you object, then go to Stratford-on-Avon and tell them to get rid of all the Shakespeare stuff, close down all the theatres. Things like that. There's nothing wrong with a place exploiting its own history for its own prosperity. So, anyway, that's an aside. So what they are, they could be extra-dimensional, they could be creatures from under the sea, they could be creatures that have been sharing this planet with us and we don't know. They could be angels and demons. They could be all of the above. They could be none of the above. They could be some of the above. We don't know what they are. We do know they are real. They exist. There's no doubt about that at all. So what's going to happen now, though? That's the question. This thing exists. It's real. Some people know and others don't. Next slide, please. So are we going to see, as Stephen Bassett once, this guy, or his successor, whoever that is, sitting there in front of the TV screen saying, "My fellow Americans, UFOs are real." I mean, whatever way, he'll dress up in some kind of political language. I mean, there's many draft examples of potential disclosure speeches. Some have been recorded live with actors, of how it could look, or it could be what it could be like. I've actually written one myself, because I've written a book, a fictional book about this subject, so I'll tell you more about that at the end. But one thing's for certain is, if this happens, it's a one-way street. Once disclosure has happened, there's no going back. And it can't happen in one place either. I mean, I think if disclosure had happened during the Cold War, even then it would have been impossible to prevent it happening worldwide. Even with the media, very little media, and the Soviet Union being closed off, it still would not have been possible to prevent the news spreading. In this case, it would spread instantly across the world with modern media. Next slide, please. Now, you see these slides are a bit out of date, because this chump has now gone, and he's been replaced by the wicked witch. What's her name? Theresa May, or whatever her name is. Mother Teresa. I don't know. Yeah, she's horrible. She's horrible anyway. Within almost instantly after that announcement had been made by the US president, we would see our own leader come out number 10 and say the same thing, and you'd see this repeated in every nation on earth. Is it possible? Can it happen? That's the question. This is the big question, I think. Is that a realistic scenario? Next slide, please. Now we've got to look at the implications of this truth coming out. Not least in the amount of time that this secret has existed, and the amount of knowledge that the keepers of the secret potentially have. Now I've done an entire lecture on this. I think the first time I was here in January, I did an entire speech on this, which you can watch on a video online. It's called Energy, Politics and UFOs. And I go into this subject in more detail. But basically, the power plants and propulsion systems of extraterrestrial craft may well have been back-engineered by secret government institutions. What Richard Dolan, he calls them the breakaway civilization. Other people call them majestic. You can use words like Illuminati, whichever you choose to use. The keepers of the secret, the masters of infinity, etc., etc. If that is the case, then this technology, it's obviously, these craft, if they're coming through interdimensional portals or flying across the universe, they're not doing it on Texaco unleaded 4-star. They have esoteric propulsion systems and power plants. Now, if that technology has been back-engineered, it could be used on Earth to fuel our civilization. And the benefits of that are incalculable and almost beyond our comprehension. The improvement they could make to our lives and the lives of everyone in the world is astonishing. Environmental damage would become a thing of the past, because this technology is clean. And I must point out that, and I'll go into more details in my other speech, but it's not just a UFO issue. Human inventors have come up with similar types of energy sources, free energy, Nikola Tesla, people like that. But freeing us from fossil fuels and many, many other destructive ways that we live would prevent environmental damage. And our lifestyle is damaging the environment. And it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in carbon dioxide emission causing climate change or not. Even if you don't, you have to concede that our activities on Earth are doing a lot of damage to the environment. That could be healed. And I described that in more detail in my other speech, by the use of free, clean, limitless energy. Next slide, please. Free energy could take some of the poorest people on Earth and lift them out of poverty. Some of the poorest and most destitute societies in the world could achieve a standard of living beyond anything they've ever experienced before. Basically, the gap between the rich countries and poor countries would be eliminated, or certainly greatly reduced, and it would be an upwards. It wouldn't be the rich ones coming down. It would be both going up. Next slide, please. This is the world we could live in. It's the world we could have lived in, and hopefully we will. Maybe, I'm not a utopian, but I still believe that the world we could live in would be, if, with the use of this technology, in many, many different ways, and the effects it would have on our culture and our society and the way we relate to each other politically and economically, would be enormously beneficial and would greatly improve human society in every way. Next slide, please. Who could possibly object to that? Surely. Think how good it. Now we come to maybe the source. This is one of the reasons why I think we have not had access to this free energy. And again, I go into more details in my other speech. We're going to have to go up to the chairman of Royal Dutch Shell, knock on his door. You know, he'll let you in. He's probably got an office bigger than this room. He sits behind a desk, probably it stretches from there to there. And you're going to have to go up to this guy and say, excuse me, sir, I'm just come to tell you your services are no longer required. But have you thought about maybe going into other businesses? You know, there's Shell candles. So you still need oil to make candles, don't you? Shell candles, there'd be a big dollar on that. Just think about it. They're pretty colours, they smell nice, they won't stain your wallpaper. Shell candles. No, I don't think so. No. The oil and fossil fuels is not just the biggest industry on earth, it is industry. It's the lifeblood and the lubricant of civilization as we know it. Now, and this is where we have to see the world not through our own eyes as ordinary folk who just want a good life and good lives for everyone. We've got to see it through their eyes, the eyes of the power brokers and the plutocrats of the world. That's not pleasant. It's not pleasant to contemplate what they think. But what they will see is a destruction in. They will see it as enormously destructive, an institution of a chaotic, anarchic system injected into the political and economic world. They will see India and China taking over everything with their huge populations and enormous resources. The destabilization of all kinds of societies, of nations, of companies, of corporations, of industries, as a result of the transfer from going from fossil fuel to free energy. To the point where, now I mean, a lot of them, it's not just about money. A lot of them are very, very rich off the oil business. Their own personal fortunes as well, their own personal incomes, which are considerable. There are some, I think, who are just concerned about that. They're just greedy and they're just worried about they just want to have as much money and as much as they can, and free energy would put an end to that, and that's why they don't want to do it. They're not necessarily politically motivated at a lower level. This is a sort of second echelon, lower level group of people. But at a higher level, they're thinking much more they're thinking much more abstractly, they're thinking more politically, they're thinking more strategically. And at a higher level, it's not just about money, it's about control. And that is one of the reasons why we don't have free energy. And as I said before, watch Exopolitics and UFOs, this is my first speech I did here at SUFON. Next slide, please. There's also a cultural element to this. I mean, for whatever reason, I think the idea that we're some kind of little island, little oasis of life in an infinite cosmic desert is quintessential to our psychological control and our cultural control of the powers that be over us. Now, in 1959, at the very start of the space program, not long after Sputnik, the Brookings Institute, which is a psychological think tank, published a report in which they stated that the potential for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. This is when they didn't know what was out there. They were just sending rockets up there for the first time. What if they discovered that the Earth was not alone in the universe? What if they discovered that distinct evidence of intelligent civilizations out, either past or present, out there in the universe? And they concluded that if this came to light, it probably would not be a good idea to shout it from the rooftops. The report doesn't specifically recommend a cover-up, but it hints at it. It really is a very strong elbow in the ribs, telling NASA, because this report was compiled for NASA, just saying, look, it would be better not to tell anyone about it. Another reason, another problem, is that the idea of civilizations out there, that we're not alone, humans are not alone. There are beings out there with much higher technology and the means to essentially, well, they can certainly evade our aircraft. Seems they can do pretty much what they want. They seem to have a monopoly on power when it comes to this, and that is not a welcome thing to grasp if you consider that some of them may not be friendly. And well, I'll come on to, we've talked about Carol Rosin, the fact that the government might deliberately say that and pretend that they're all evil so they can unite people. But what if some of them really are? Obviously the majority of them aren't, otherwise we wouldn't be here. This next picture has a trigger warning, okay? The next slide I'm going to show you, so prepare yourselves. This is a cow, a dead cow, which has fallen foul of the mysterious mutilation phenomenon. This is something that's been going on for a very, very long time. It's completely mysterious, and no one knows what's causing it. No one knows. There's no theoretical reason why anyone or anything might be doing this. Farm animals like this are affected. Wild animals, marine animals, dolphins, seals, things like that. Pets, circus animals, and all species. And I do mean all species. Humans too. That's the thing. Now that's an area where even some researchers into the mutilation phenomena will not go. They will say it's basically every species but not humans. They will say. And you try to mention, because human bodies turn up with these kinds of injuries, and you try to talk to about it, and they just shut down the conversation. But they say, well, they do this to animals but not humans. Humans are different. Humans are, and this I think has got a lot to do with the way some people see ourselves. We have this idea, don't we? It's humans and animals, isn't it? Humans and animals. But humans are animals, as Charles Darwin has pointed out. We're a species of ape. We are unusual in the sense we walk upright and we have intelligence and we don't have any hair on our bodies and things like that. But we're still an animal, and it's possible that a highly advanced, intelligent extraterrestrial species that is doing this for whatever reason they're doing it maybe they don't see it as malevolent. Maybe they're just doing it. They may just regard humans as just one more species of vermin to poke and prod. But either way, of course, this is extremely disturbing, especially since there's not a lot anyone can do to stop them. And this comes back to the debate between, blow up between Dr. Stephen Greer and Kerry Cassidy. Greer says they're all nice, they're all lovely. I actually agree with Kerry Cassidy. The evidence suggests that these extraterrestrials have a very wide variety they seem to have a wide variety of agendas. They display many, many different types of behaviour. Some of them are nice, some of them are very nice. And they're very friendly, loving. Others are not, the majority seem to be pretty much in a disinterested way studying us. And there is a minority who are malevolent, who've harmed people, and there are people that they have caused deaths and injuries as a result of there are people who've died and suffer severe injuries as a result of their encounters with these beings. And that is a fact, and it has to be dealt with. And this is another thing that would have to come out in a disclosure speech. The moment the president gets off the TV, this is what's going to be going through people's heads. What do you know about this? Next slide, please. Abduction, alien abduction. Millions and millions of people are affected by this. It's being done. I talked about Linda Napolitano earlier on. I know people who are serial abductees who constantly have these experiences, have been taken by these beings and having various experiences, some of them pleasant, some of them are just sort of like strange, others are distinctly unpleasant. And this is affecting so many people. There's something I want to show you, and this is why I need both my hands free. Don't worry, it's not that kind of show. Can any of you see a mark on my arm? maybe you can't, it's from that distance. On my arm, on my arm there, on my upper arm, just above the tan line, there's a circular mark. It's a circle, with a red circle with a couple of dots in the middle, two oval-shaped dots. I noticed this a couple of years ago. I didn't think much of it. I just happened to sort of see it there, and I thought, well, that's just a sort of mark that's appeared on my skin. It doesn't really mean anything. And then I was at a conference last year, and there were some people there with scanning equipment for picking up implants. There are people who have certain objects in their body which have appeared there through, no one knows exactly how they have appeared, they just happen to appear in the body. These are very often strange devices that are not really, they don't resemble any piece of technology that we know of. Let's have a look a bit presentable again. And I wasn't. These people were in a booth. They sort of set up a booth, which was like in a tent which had wire in it. Because it was like a Faraday cage to eliminate electromagnetic smog, so you wouldn't get false readings. And they were all in there with it. And they'd have these 3 scanners. There was an electromagnetic field detector, there was a metal detector, and there was a radio frequency detector. And they would run these up people's bodies and try and discover their implants. Now I wasn't going to go in there because I thought, well, what the hell, I've got none of these things, have I? I thought, I don't have any of these things. I have no memory of any experience would lead me to believe that someone had put something in my body. And then this guy was there, he come all the way from Malta for this conference in the West Country. He stared at me and said, "Don't say that, Ben." So I did get scanned in the end. And as complete surprise to me, completely unexpectedly, I found that there is actually radio frequency pulses coming from my arm, or there was when I was scanned. It was 40 megahertz, quite high frequency pulses, and they were coming from exactly the spot where that mark is on my arm. And the guy scanning me, he said, well, he pointed to the mark and he said, well, look, it looks like you've been implanted. And I thought, blimey. And I was a bit dumbstruck, because I said, I don't know how this could have happened. I've had no experience to my knowledge that I have any ability to recall that I have perhaps had an experience like this. There's not a lot I don't know what I can do really, because if I go to the doctor and I say, look, because I could get it confirmed with an MRI scan, because not all these things show up on X-ray, and I could say, doctor, please refer me to an MRI. I think space aliens have put something in my arm and I want you to scan it to let me know. He'd refer me, all right, wouldn't he? To the psychiatric clinic. So I'm happy to let it be. But I mean, this is an example of what I'm talking about. I know other people who have had these things in their body, not just in their arms. Some of them have them in their heads, inside their brains, where they couldn't have been inserted surgically because it would kill you. I know a lady who's got them in her eyeballs. There's a man I know, who's a friend of mine actually, who has some put in his jaw. Where actually these things are devices which seem specifically designed to constrict the dental nerve. Now, if you ever had toothache, it's terrible, isn't it? This device seemed to induce toothache in his entire jaw. And so these are devices of torture that have been put in his jawbone. And his dentist hasn't got a clue what they are. So I'm not complaining. I'm lucky. But the question is going to be, I mean, you know, what are these experiences? Who's doing it? Or what is doing it? And why? I mean, obviously I don't think it's not just the extraterrestrials who are taking people and doing these things. I think the government is doing it directly themselves as well with some people, and that's another question. The man's Eric Gary to speak out and say UFOs are real, and he says they're as real as the aircraft that fly above our heads. This man was an engineer. He was a top engineer. Then he became Canada's Minister of Defence for many years. The book in his hand is Where Did the Towers Go by Dr. Judy Wood, who's a scientist who's investigated this possibility and has concluded that it is real. The evidence exists. And having looked into this myself, I think that's true. That's another issue. That's another thing that's going to be going through people's heads. And it will come up eventually when the president gets off the TV. Next slide, please. Can you make that a bit bigger, Mike? It's another small one. Now, it's not just the nature of what's been suppressed. It's not just the fact that suppression has taken place. It's not the fact that things have been suppressed in terms of free energy, things like that, the knowledge that we're not alone, etc., etc. It's not just that. It's the nature of the suppression itself. It's the fact of the suppression itself. Because we're going to ask the government, how long, if you know about this and you're now just telling us for the first time on TV, how long have you known about this before you told us? The answer is going to actually be, it depends how you word the question, but if you include things such as free energy inventions, more than a century. And that is the problem. They're going to have to say that they kept this quiet. They didn't keep it quiet for our benefit, they kept it quiet for their own benefit. They kept it quiet. They kept it quiet at enormous cost to us, an enormous detriment to us. At the cause of this secrecy, the effect of this secrecy rather, has been an enormous amount of suffering, human suffering, environmental damage, and degradation of the planet. And we're talking about things such as wars for oil. These things are going to go through people's heads when the president gets off the TV. Because we're talking about Roswell was now almost 70 years ago, but there were Roswells before then. There's free energy and things like that dating back to the late 19th century. It was kept quiet, it was suppressed, and a lot of what's happened in the world since then, people will be going through the history of the 20th century, thinking, well, how would it have been different if this secret hadn't been suppressed? I talk about this more in my energy, politics and UFOs videos. My energy and UFO and energy politics talk. But it would have been incalculably different. I've just been talking about this, about what effect would have had. It would have meant that even before the age of oil, we could have had free energy. It's remarkable just to think about that. And then what would our reaction be to know that people in government have done this to us? I mean, the credibility problem they would suffer would be enormous, just to put it mildly, wouldn't it? I mean, that's an understatement. I mean, duck ponds, extramarital affairs, that's nothing. I'd want to be at the head of this mob. I'd grab my torch and my pitchforks. I want to be at the head of this mob. I mean, it's beyond anything that's really bad enough for any kind of criminal charge or any punishment that I can think of. You know, the Prime Minister resigning, calling a general election, that wouldn't do. It wouldn't even come close to it. Next slide, please. All these questions that I brought up are going to be discussed in secret boardrooms where the keepers of the secret meet behind locked doors to talk about disclosure, whether we should have disclosure or not. And I don't know, of course, what they're saying, but I can speculate. I can guess what they're saying. Next slide, please. So the government now has a number of options in terms of disclosure. We can have the disclosure the way Greer, the way Bassett wants it, the way they're campaigning to have it. The leader comes out and they just say it's real. And this is what we kept it quiet. We're releasing this information to you now. It's real. Let's move into the post-disclosure world together in harmony. That's one option. I've already explained to you why I think the disclosure in this form is not feasible. Next question. Next slide, please. However, I mean, it's interesting to actually talk about this because Bassett has actually discussed this many times. In the current US presidential election, Hillary Clinton in particular has had UFOs associated with her many times. The leader of her campaign is a guy called John Podesta, and he has actually made several statements and he's spoken at various events talking about UFOs, about how people can handle the truth, about how it's right, they have a need to know, they have a right to know. I follow him on Twitter, and it's amazing some of the things he comes up with about UFOs. Whenever a new UFO news story comes about, John Podesta is there commenting on it, saying about how the government should be talking about this. Hillary presumably has hired this guy to run her campaign, and she doesn't object. In fact, Hillary herself was asked questions about UFOs at one of the caucuses, and she gave some very interesting answers. And her husband Bill has talked about this as well, about how he tried to get information on UFOs and no one told him, and things like this, about how he's talked about Roswell and Area 51 and stuff like that. The Jimmy Kimmel show is the one to go to, because that's Obama has said a few things about it as well. So there is this kind of like interesting night, guys. Thanks for coming. It's interesting kind of it's undertone. It's almost hinting in the media about this issue. Next slide, please. Or they could just continue with the truth embargo in its modern form. They could just continue with it. Is that all right? Yeah, that's okay. They could just continue with it as it is, and we'll just go along without any change. But how long, realistically, is that possible? How long, realistically, can that be done? Because we're talking about an irresistible force and an immovable object. Yeah, it's that kind of situation. It cannot go on indefinitely. It can't go on for much longer. One way or another, something's going to have to crack. Next slide, please. This is an interesting film. This is a film from 1956 called The Earth versus Flying Saucers, which is not a very good title because it gives away the plot. But basically, it's a similar plot to Independence Day. Actually, it's about alien invaders who come down and try to destroy it and have to be fought off. It's quite an amusing film, and there's a great spoof made by Tim Burton actually called Mars Attacks. You have to see that; it's really hilarious. But what's interesting about this film is it was made with the assistance of ufologists, and the actual extraterrestrial craft do resemble real reports on UFOs. However, as with Independence Day, there's some themes in the film which lead me to believe that the government is very, very keen for us to perceive UFOs in a certain way, and that they may be going for exactly what Carol Rosin has said when she related the words of Werner von Braun. That there's going to be some kind of statement from the government along the lines of UFOs are real, but the rest will be lies. There will be false information we'll be told false information about them to make us respond in a certain way. In other words, they get over the disclosure problem by just adding to the truth embargo in a different way. That, I think, is the most likely outcome, and that's what we have to be on our guard against. Next slide, please. I don't know is the truth. As I said, there's a lot of internal conflict in me. I don't know whether we're going to have disclosure or not of the type Steve Bassett and Greer talks about. The exopolitical world is split over this. People either are very, very certain, or they're very, very certain it's possible, or certain that it's not possible. I'm divided, and I think the rational side of myself says that the willing disclosure is impossible for the reasons I've explained, and I explained in my other talk. But there's a part of me, I think, because the idea is so appealing, especially when I listen to Stephen Bassett talking, that on an emotional level I can't let it go, and I can't think, what if? Could it be? Is it possible? And I think only time will tell. But next slide, please. In the meantime, I've actually written a book which is going to be available very soon. Actually, I'm going through the process of getting it done at the printers now. It's called Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, and on my there'll be details on my website about when it comes out. It basically is a fictional book about UFO disclosure. It talks about the Roswell incident. Steve Bassett was on the radio saying, what would have happened if we'd had disclosure on Roswell? Just imagine what the 20th century would have been like after that. I'm sure someone one day will write a book about it. I can't, I don't have time, but someone will. Well, I thought, I contacted Steve, and I said, well, why not? Why don't I do it? I can write. I've written books before. I've written 2 novels. I can write another novel. And so I've written a fictional allegorical novel about what would happen if we had disclosure. So I hope you enjoy that book when it comes out. Going to go back to the first slide again, Mike. I should put another copy of that slide at the bottom, shouldn't I? Thanks, mate. In the meantime, if you want to know any more about me, that's my website there, HPANWO, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. I want to say thanks to Emlyn, to Steve and to everyone else who's organised this event. It's been really, really great and I've really enjoyed it. And you guys, thanks for coming. I really appreciate you listening to me. You take care. Now, what's the time now?
10:25.
Oh, blimey, is it?
Yeah.
So, is it getting a bit late now? Is it all right? Okay, does anyone have a question? Maybe one, if anyone's got a burning question? No, all right, it's getting a bit late now, so sorry, I didn't mean to go on this long. That's much longer than the first time I did it, but thanks for coming, guys. All right, take care. I don't know why that took so much longer this time.
No, you mentioned implants earlier.
Implants, yeah.
What sort of forms can they take?
Oh, there's many different types. They appear to be. One second. They are. They seem to be metallic. They seem to be made of metal in most places. They don't seem to be. They don't look like conventional electronics or anything like that.
Can they come in form of warts? Can they come in form of implants in the body?
They tend to be under the skin, and they don't usually make a mark. It's very strange because the immune system doesn't react against them. Almost as if sometimes your blood vessels and nerves grow around them. Very, very odd. I mean, I know a lady who had them in her nose. She had one in her nose, and she had it confirmed. And she went and had it. She went all the way to Greece to have a private operation costing thousands of pounds to have it removed. Okay. And she went back. She went back home again. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, someone or something put another one back in there. So she had another implant put in. How about that? I better move my glasses.
Yeah, okay.